Hello. The much anticipated BRICS Summit is underway in Russia, with BRICS expanding to include new members and increasingly positioning itself as a counterbalance to the Western-led global order. What does it all mean for geopolitics, economics, and other issues at stake? Well, to find out, I spoke to Professor David Monyae, who's an expert in international relations and director at the University of Johannesburg's Center for China-Africa Studies. Professor David Monyae, thank you very much indeed for joining us on the BRICS Africa channel.
You're most welcome.
Prof, the BRICS Summit is currently underway at Kazan in Russia, and it's a BRICS Plus now. We've got new inclusions like Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, and the UAE. I just wonder, in your view, what the inclusion of these new members means geopolitically. There are definitely opportunities, but I'm guessing challenges as well.
Oh, indeed, there are a lot of opportunities as well as challenges. Opportunity in the sense that there's an expansion of the GDP of BRICS Plus itself compared to G7. And as you are aware, the BRICS Plus GDP is now much larger than the G7. So this alters the geopolitics, it alters the power dynamics at the world stage. Also, in terms of power shifts, even though the United States and Western world are much more still in command in terms of power, global power, that is, the BRICS Plus tend to now bringing in a multipolar world that the centers of power are shifting, and it really depends. For instance, on oil, the bulk of BRICS Plus countries are oil-producing countries. So what it means that in future, the price of oil won't be determined in the Western world. There are issues of the de-dollarization and all these factors of altering the post-1945 world order. It's at play. You're not going to get BRICS currents, but they trade in local currencies between these countries among themselves. It's going to really change the world that we know in terms of trade, politics. It's also taking place at a time when there are a lot of conflicts and at times tensions. I'll give you an example. You have Egypt and Ethiopia, now members of BRICS Plus, and they don't see eye to eye due to the dam, the Grand Ethiopia Renaissance Dam. So it's a plus in the sense that they'll be able to speak to each other and find ways of resolving their differences. China itself and India, they just signed an agreement over the border, which is good news. It's going to be welcomed by the rest of BRICS Plus and strengthen BRICS because these are major BRICS countries, India with 1.3 billion and China as well. So these are positive developments. You also have Russia with the Ukraine crisis. So the dynamics are so many where there's so many opportunities as well as there are challenges in terms of how best to speak in a coherent way as a body. They're still finding their way, and one hopes that the summit or the forum itself will bring something coherent that we can safely say this is BRICS Plus at play.
There are concerns, though, that BRICS is becoming a geopolitical tool for Russia and China, particularly in opposing the Western liberal order. How do you perceive this? And is there a risk of BRICS being seen more as a political tool than maybe as an economic and development forum?
BRICS Plus is a necessary development. And you can go back to the establishment of the non-alignment movement, the group 77 plus China, and you have a number of formations that have been trying to negotiate with the US-led world order, the Western countries. And in most instances, these other bodies have been failing for the very first time because of China and because of India, because of Russia. Now you're seeing a really formidable force that can counterweight the Western world. And therefore, one would say the tension of views that is going to be used against the West, it's a Western narrative. They dominate the media. But for me, it's a question of who is chairing. Given the fact that this year is being chaired by a country that is at war with Ukraine, or at also war with the Western world, with NATO, that those tensions and issues that are going to raise, the chair of any of these bodies has more powers in terms of what is being put on the agenda. And therefore, I think one would understand the views that are coming from the Western world, that BRICS might be used against the West. But for me, it's temporary. It's just this year because Russia is chairing. Next year, if it's chaired by another country, more likely Brazil, it won't be the case. It was not the case last year when it was South Africa. There will be issues here and there, but I think you are not going to have a perfect opposition between the West and this new. There will always be issues, and therefore I think it's a question of issue-based. India is there to advance its own interest, even though India is much closer to the Western world. As much as South Africa, it's a liberal in democracy. It has so much in common with the Western world than other countries. But when it comes to economy, it is in South Africa's interest to ensure that it is closer to China and Russia and others, in India as well, Brazil. So these are the world we live in is constantly changing. I think we're going to get this kind of arguments, but what is needed, it's a give and take. The Western world has to understand that power is shifting. In certain areas, they need to preempt instead of crying foul at all the time. I think it doesn't help the West itself.
There are concerns or questions being raised about this idea of a new payment system, block technology, cryptocurrency. Russia is really driving this intention, and I just wonder how feasible is this goal, and what impact could it have on global financial governance, for example?
I think we've seen since the formation of BRICS in 2009, I think we've seen significant changes in the manner in which we conduct business in the world. I think we've seen the formation of the NDP, the BRICS Bank, and there's been talk about the SWIFT, a new BRICS plus SWIFT system. This has been in the pipeline in terms of lessening the hegemonic power of the Western world. And I think it's also coming at a time when the United States and the rest of Western world is weaponizing some of these global public goods, such as SWIFT, the dollar itself, and therefore you're going to get reaction. So similarly, the issues put on the table by Russia, even though Russia has greater interest, given that it is facing challenges with the West, that move is supported by the rest of the BRICS plus countries. All countries are starting to ask questions. Are our investment in the Western world safe, given what the West did with Russia reserves? Is the SWIFT, should I disagree with the Western countries, will we be punished the same way as Russia is being done? So there is a need to create alternatives. So this is what is happening. There is a need for legitimate global public goods such as SWIFT that are going to be used as public goods that are not politicized and, more importantly, not weaponized, as the United States has done since the start of the Russia-Ukraine conflict.
The new development bank and the contingent reserve arrangement represents BRICS' early steps into financial governance. How significant are these institutions, do you think, in shifting global financial power? And what more can be expected from them in the future?
They're quite significant. They provide the developing world with alternative source of infrastructure financing. They provide a balancing act, and therefore, I think we are going to see more of this, even though the Western world, IMF, World Bank, they're still overwhelming in charge. They're leading, but I think with time, with more contribution coming from these countries, and some of them have massive liquidity, such as Saudi Arabia. I think you're going to get more and more alternatives and more agreements in terms of with less conditions attached to some of these loans. And therefore, I think it is the nature and character of an emerging multipolarity in the world politics.
Talking about agreements, with trade amongst BRICS countries more than doubling, how likely is it, do you think, that BRICS could start to move towards things like free trade agreements? Is that something that we might see having a broader impact if BRICS facilitates this new global system?
Our chances are very high. I think we never thought last year that BRICS is going to expand. I think it came as a surprise that these countries do not have much in common, yet they've agreed on a number of issues. So I think for the lack of a better term, one would then say this is unity in diversity, unity over core issues of mutual interests, issue-based. So you're going to see trade as one area that more focus will be on, but not overall the rest of BRICS, but some of BRIC countries. For instance, you might see China, Africa, for instance, as an outlet. You might see your Brazil and some areas with ASEAN, for instance. You might see dynamics shifting with time. But at the end of the day, I think we're going back. I think your question also goes on the fact that the whole process of globalization, there's this retreat when the Western world faced competition. They were in the forefront of leading globalization process. When they started losing out in terms of competition, they now going for a process that we call deglobalization, where it suits them, but they yet supporting globalization in areas where they have comparative advantage. For instance, in new technologies, whether in solar, whether your telecoms. However, when it comes to agreements, trade agreements in other areas where they're not making more benefits, they tend to close their borders. And so these dynamics are going to continue, but some of BRICS countries might see this as a platform for them to increase their trade, whether it's for Egypt, for Ethiopia, Saudi Arabia, Iran, for your India, and new players that might come in, more likely your Indonesia, your Malaysia, the formidable force that should be considered to be part of the BRICS Plus.
So, depending on which lens you're looking at things, issues about human rights and accountability come to mind. And so there may be sensitivities within the BRICS nations about where each country sits and views the things that goes on in each other members' countries. How will they deal with sensitive issues like this?
This forum is an open-ended. They don't have binding agreements, and therefore it's a loose agreement, and it's an issue basis I've mentioned earlier. And therefore, the whole question, Western world value laden issues such as human rights, democracy, liberal democracy, and the like, are starting to be questioned at a time when the Western world itself is in the forefront of violation of human rights. If you look at Middle East, what's happening in Palestine, what's happening in Lebanon, where the United States supplies weapons supported by Western country, particularly your Britain and Germany, weapons that are killing thousands and thousands of innocent people. It makes mockery of the entire human rights narrative that you cannot blame China, nor can you blame Russia. They tend to not to be in the forefront on genocide issues. So yes, rhetorically, people will talk about this, but practically, people's eyes are wide open. They see what's happening. As long as the Middle East crisis is not resolved, it will be hard for the Western world to win the debate over human rights against the BRICS or against China or Russia or any other of the new members, such as Saudi Arabia and Iran.
As Africa watches on and some African countries are members of BRICS Plus, what might be success for the continent at the conclusion of this summit? What can Africa look forward to, perhaps with a little bit of hope and anticipation?
Oh, indeed. I think for Africa, from an African Union Agenda 2063, it is quite important for Africa to ensure that it advances multilateralism, the process of globalization, and this requires global peace and security. Africa cannot develop in a world that is at war, and therefore I think BRICS opens up an opportunity for the continent to expand cooperation with countries in different sectors, whether it is the blue economy, with the issues of space, technology, or issues of environment, alternative source of energy, or technical skill that is required to engine Africa's development. And therefore, I think BRICS provides that platform. The continent is rich, not only with human resource, with 1.3 billion people. Unlike other continents, this continent has the youngest people, and this is a future market for the world economy. Also, 60% of global fertile land is on the continent. While we talk about technology, fourth industrial revolution, the basic issue that the future needs food, basic food. And the continent could take advantage of these outlets to ensure that you engage the external players positively in terms of the role they play in boosting the development for the continent. And I think it is also important for South Africa now, Egypt and Ethiopia to also encourage BRICS countries to play a positive role to avoid doing what the Western world does, dumping weapons on the continent, encouraging conflicts. I think bringing these players in a positive way in key areas for employment, poverty, inequality, I think it would be great for the continent.
Professor David Monyae, Director for the Center for Africa-China Studies at the University of Johannesburg. Thank you very, very much indeed for joining us on the BRICS Africa channel.
You're most welcome.